Hello again, Internet. In today's video, I'll be modeling up a small single-board computer called La Potato. It's theoretically a low-cost competitor to the Raspberry Pi, but in reality, you can't buy a Raspberry Pi anymore, so it's not in competition at all. You can still buy this, though. Um, in the audio for today's video, I'll be discussing the results of a research project I gave myself, seeking to find the best CAD software in the world in 2023, ideally something to replace SolidWorks. So first, why? Partly, it's just a good idea in general. New software with new ideas and better design can come out, and old software can get so much better over time that it's effectively something new. There are still some mechanical engineers using AutoCAD, for example. And it's not because it's good or efficient or fast or anything like that. It's because they don't bother to look for something better, and they just kind of stick with what they're used to. And I don't want to be that person. Uh, Second reason, it has to do with SolidWorks itself. While it does continue to see some development, most users agree that it's been getting worse recently. So SolidWorks 2020 seems to be the last good release. Service Pack 4 and Service Pack 5 are both pretty good. But after that, SolidWorks 2021 came out, and that started to be a problem. Um, New bugs, stability issues, and there are some new features, but they're not really needed by anyone. Then 2022 is worse. 2023 is even worse than that. And at this rate, eventually it's just going to become completely unusable software if this pattern continues. So those who purchase SolidWorks 2020 can continue using it as long as they like. And if they're on a subscription, obviously they can't. But if they actually purchase a perpetual license, they can keep using it. But those wanting to purchase 2022 today, they can still do that. Or they can still purchase version 2020 today. But it's unclear how much longer this will actually be the case. Right now, most resellers I've seen, they only go back to 2019 or 2020. So over time, that's probably only going to go back to 2021. And then 2020 is just not going to be available for purchase anymore. Students and makers looking for low-cost licenses for non-commercial use, either educational or just making stuff for themselves, they don't have the option for 2020 at all. Even 2021 is no longer available to students and makers. So basically, students and makers cannot get the best version of SolidWorks yet released. Those willing to pay thousands of dollars for a license can still get a copy, but again, might not be that case much longer. And even if we assume the SolidWorks 2020 is still the best CAD software available in 2023, its current and future lack of availability it's a serious downside. As someone who wants to teach people how to design things, teaching SolidWorks is starting to feel a bit awkward because of this. So I started my research by looking online for lists of CAD software. I found several long lists, and after combining them and removing duplicates, I ended up with a list of 94 programs, including SolidWorks. Many of these were eliminated quickly just by looking at the product pages and seeing that they lack very basic features any mechanical designer or engineer is going to need in a typical workflow. Using this method, I was able to trim the list down to just 12 programs, including SolidWorks. And I'm just going to go through them alphabetically because that seems like the most logical way. So first, before I start the list, I should mention a few things. Cloud software. A couple of the titles on this are cloud software, meaning either you don't install them on your computer or you do install them on your computer, but you need a constant internet connection anyway. And I'm not a big fan of cloud-based suites because, well, number one, not everyone's going to have reliable or fast enough internet to actually make use of them. But also, there's an issue of support. So if their servers go down, and it's not your fault at all, your computer works fine, your internet is fine, but their server goes down, their internet goes down, whatever. Now you can't work. Just gotta wait for them to come back up. If they remain down because the company doesn't want to continue supporting them, or they discontinue the software, then your time learning that software is kind of a waste. And you also might lose valuable data that you cannot use the software anymore and if you're lucky, you might be able to export steps before the software goes down, but even then, a step is not the same as a feature-based model. So just a quick story. Years ago, I was using a cloud service provided by Autodesk, and it started out pretty good, as long as I had a good internet connection, which I didn't have one at home, but at other places I had a good internet connection, so I just used it there. Um, and the software worked great. But over time, it got popular because it's free and it worked great. And Autodesk did not invest in the servers. And over time, the service became terrible. What originally took like half an hour to process would now take several days. Then one day I went to log in and the service was just offline. My files were gone. The workflow I developed was useless. And there was no warning even. So cloud services of all kinds have had similar ends. Usually they'll at least give some warning to allow users to download or transfer data, but not always. Just as an example, about a week ago-ish, Google Stadia was taken offline, and that was a complete dumpster fire because like parts of it started going down like a month in advance. People had already paid in advance for stuff, and people had paid for games that now they can't. Some people that paid for games get their games, but if they paid for them in a different way, then they don't get to keep their games. It's a whole mess. So while I'm giving cloud-based services a chance, if any of them are actually good enough to be considered the best, then I have to consider that there's a distinct possibility that things will not stay as they are, and it's possible those services might not even exist in a few years. Second, I need to mention subscription models. Traditionally, software came with perpetual license, so you buy it and you can run it forever. And you might want to buy another version next year because it's got new features and whatnot, but you don't have to. If the current version does everything you need, you can just keep running it and running it. Nowadays, subscription software is getting a lot more popular, so the initial expense is lower usually, but then over time, at a couple years or a few years, the subscription ends up being about the same, and then eventually it ends up being more expensive. That's the whole reason they switched to subscription model. If they wanted to lower the price, they just lower the price. The whole point of subscriptions is to make more money off of you. So that's a bit of an issue. But what's more significant is that it times out. So if a company wants to just stop selling software, stop selling the subscription, well, you don't get to keep using the software. That's how it is. And a lot of the titles on this list are subscription only, which is a big downside for those reasons. I'll still give them a fair chance, but if it turns out that one of these titles is currently the best, then I have to consider that new versions might not be, and you will not be able to continue using current versions forever. Alright, so on to the list. Autodesk Fusion is a cloud-based CAD suite. In spite of being cloud-based, it looked pretty promising at first. Some things I consider essential are missing, but it also has some pretty cool features that SolidWorks doesn't. It's even free under certain circumstances, which is a huge plus. Even if you're a company that's selling stuff, if you're small enough, the software is free. And even if you're bigger, it's not that expensive, at least by the standards of CAD. Modeling is pretty much what you expect if you're used to SolidWorks. There are differences, but they're minor. Assemblies are different than SolidWorks, and even people that use Autodesk Inventor, made by the same company, they're going to notice pretty significant differences. Drawings are also completely different. Overall, it does work well. It's a bit slow, a bit choppy sometimes, and a bit more waiting around than I'm used to, but it does work. For free, I can't really complain about those issues. It's also pretty stable, which is rare in CAD. Big issue I ran into was with assembly complexity. The program basically just falls on its face with assemblies containing over 2,500 parts. That includes screws, nuts, washers. It doesn't take that long to get to 2,500 parts. Some people might never run into that, but for me, that assemblies with over 2,500 parts are pretty common. So this has been an issue apparently for a while now, and I don't know if it's something deep in the engine that they can't fix, but even Jeff Strader, the software architect of Fusion 360, the big man, the guy in charge, he recommends using something else if you want assemblies with over 2,500 parts. So I can't recommend Fusion because of this, but to a certain customer that is, wanting something free and making relatively simple assemblies, it could be a potentially valuable resource. Um, Next is Autodesk Inventor, which I had some trouble getting. They do offer student licenses, but I was unable to get one because the educational nonprofit I work with uses .org instead of .edu for their email addresses, so apparently that's not good enough for Autodesk. So I started looking at reviews, user comments, Reddit, all that stuff, and I saw a lot of complaints, but also some praise. So I really needed a copy to review, but I wasn't about to pay what they were asking just to get a review copy. Then I started a new job, and when I came in, I saw I had Inventor 2023 Professional on my desktop. That turned out to be a bad thing because now I have to use it at work. But it was a good thing in the sense that I could use a fully functional version of it as much as I wanted, and unfortunately far more than I wanted. Um, it only took a couple days to become familiar with it. I'm still learning workarounds for missing features and bugs that the program is, but the program itself isn't that complex, so it's relatively easy to learn. Modeling is almost the same as SolidWorks. Assemblies are different, but familiar enough. The big issues are mostly have to do with some pretty basic features being missing and some other features being completely broken or so poorly designed that they can't do what they should be able to do. Drawings are radically different, but the interface doesn't take that long to learn, and most of making a drawing is not really related to the software at all. Ideally, the software just kind of gets out of your way and lets you make a drawing. And a lot of making a drawing is just knowledge about what a drawing should be once it's printed out. So stability is terrible. Modeling a part is relatively stable. Making a drawing, a lot less stable. And assemblies are downright crash happy. I think I averaged over one crash per half hour of use at this point. A lot of the issues are related to certain feature types, others related to using assemblies and drawings that were made in the 2022 release and earlier. So they've got a serious issue with backwards compatibility on their own files that they crash all the time, to the point where it's not uncommon for someone to spend a week remaking an assembly and a drawing package just so that it works in version 2023, even though it worked fine in 2022. It's also slow. Things that should be instant can take a minute or two just to process. So like, want to open a part with a single feature, no external references, a single extrude feature, that's it. It's already open in the assembly even. You just want to open the part itself. That can take over 30 seconds. Relatively simple assemblies that should be fast, they kind of drag the computer down. And the computer I'm working on, it's a good system. SolidWorks runs like a dream on it. It's also very click happy. Almost everything I do requires one or two extra clicks versus SolidWorks, sometimes more. Overall, it is very capable, but it's frustrating, and you want to save very, very often in spite of the fact that saving takes way too long. Talking with other engineers that have been using the software longer, it seems that most of the issues I ran into are known issues that they all kind of struggle with or have developed procedures for getting around. Even if they've been using the software for years, they're still struggling with these issues. They also say the software has been going downhill for several years. So at this point, the only reason anyone upgrades is to be able to work with files saved by newer versions, because apparently you can't buy old versions of the software, so the company is kind of forced to upgrade every year, because they're adding seats every year. They're getting new people every year, more people every year. So every year they have to buy the newest version for those people, and then for everyone to be else to be compatible with those people, everyone has to get the new version. And that's the only reason they're upgrading at this point. So I'm generally trying to avoid talking about price because that could change at any time. But from what I understand, it is a lot cheaper than SolidWorks. If you ignore the wasted time, the rework, and the potential for defective products that are far more likely in a program like this that doesn't have any kind of quality validation tools. So I'd say it's inferior to SolidWorks in almost every way. Again, currently the price is lower, but once you figure all the extra time you're paying people just to fix things that shouldn't need fixing, it probably ends up being a lot more expensive. Um, so CATIA, I love CATIA. CATIA is awesome. It's fast, it's stable, it can do basically everything. It's a bit click heavy sometimes, and the graphics don't look good, but I can give those minor issues pretty easily for something with rock style stability and incredible quality. What's harder to forgive is the price, and there are no official price lists for the software, but from what I understand, this one is ridiculously expensive, to the point where the annual fees could be more than what the engineer using it is actually taking home. Um, so it's easily the most expensive software I looked at on this list, several times over, and that again, try not to talk about price too much, but it's a serious concern on this one. That it seems to be the main reason people don't use it is the price. Um, so there are cases where designs are complex enough that CATIA is basically the only option. Just because it's so fast with complex assemblies, you can model things up that are bigger than any other CAD software is just gonna fall on its face, and CATIA, well, it might not be really fast, it's gonna handle it just fine. So in some cases, CATIA is the only option. So I guess it's the best option in those cases. Also the worst, of course. um, there might also be cases where spending money isn't a big concern, but that's got to be relatively rare. I think for most users and most companies, the expense is just simply too high to recommend this. Uh, but again, if money is no object, or you're talking about incredibly complex designs, CATIA is probably the best software I came across in my search. Um, then there's Creo. Creo's garbage. Just ask any Creo user, or ask a Wildfire user, that's what it used to be called, or ask a Pro Engineer user, that's what it was called before Wildfire. They keep changing the name of the software. It's that bad. They have to keep changing the name. Because over time the entire industry is just like, oh well, Pro Engineer is garbage. So, but what about this Wildfire thing? New software. Ooh, maybe this is better. And then, oh, Wildfire's garbage, but Creo, ooh, new software. That maybe this is better. It's the same exact software, it's just new name. Um, so it's slow, it's unstable, it lacks basic features that SolidWorks had last millennium. The company behind it, called PTC, does some pretty shady things that to get companies to adopt it, and I'm not really going to go into it because a lot of it is through the grapevine, and oh, he got fired because he did this with the salesperson, and it's pretty shady. One example that I can definitely go on the record with is that I have personally seen them fake videos at a product launch event to convince people to buy software based on features that didn't exist and were not going to exist in the software that they were selling. So it was just straight up false advertising. Um, and they apparently got away with it. So they'll probably keep doing it. So Creo's garbage. PTC is garbage. Avoid it if you possibly can. Next is FreeCAD. FreeCAD is free. It's even open source, which is pretty great. It does the basics, but it's pretty limited when it comes to more advanced modeling. It's a bit slow. It's pretty unstable too. It's getting a lot better than it used to be, but it's still got some pretty big stability issues. There was a time that I had very high hopes for this software. I used it years and years ago, and every few years I look at it again. Every time I go back to it, it's a bit better, but the rate it's progressing at, it's going to take many years before it's competitive, even with like SolidWorks 2006. There also seems to be a bit of an issue with the underlying engine. This engine is also open source, but it's developed and maintained by an unrelated team. And looking at discussions among developers and feature requests and Reddit and all that, it appears the engine is really holding FreeCAD back, preventing a lot of the features that they want to implement and possibly causing a lot of the stability issues as well. And I think without a new engine, or at least a radically modified version of the existing engine, this software really doesn't have much of a future. It doesn't appear anyone on the FreeCAD team is working on improving the engine at this time, as far as I can tell. But I'm going to check back with the software in a few years. Maybe it'll be better by then. For now, I really don't think it's good enough for a professional. And even if you want free software that you're just going to use occasionally, I still think Fusion 360 or Onshape, which I'm going to talk about later, probably still better options. But if you want something that you know will always be free, this is the only title on the list. Those Fusion and Onshape, at any time they could start charging money for students and hobbyists. There's no way to say. FreeCAD, it's always going to be free. Even if they try to start charging for it, you can just download an old version, no big deal. IronCAD. This software can't even make a decent mechanical drawing. They don't seem to be investing the resources necessary to do even the most basic things in this software. And I also stumbled across some pretty misleading marketing from this company. So I think with more investment and a bit more honesty, this might be a decent option in the future, but it's not even remotely acceptable at this time. Key Creator 2023 considers anything not made in Key Creator 2023 to be an imported file, and that includes files made in Key Creator 2022 and earlier. So what this effectively means is that you're basically importing a step file when you're opening an old file that was made in this software. So you're not getting your history-based modeling or your parametrics or any of that. That's all gone. Also, drawings don't work with imported files, including old files made by Key Creator. So I cannot recommend this program at all because it just basically breaks all your files every year. That's insane. So even if it was free, I couldn't really recommend it because of that. And also, I played around with it, and it is just kind of junk. So not a good option even for free, and it's not even free. Next is NX by Siemens, which is trash. It does have a lot of dedicated fans that have been using it for years, and they will defend it to the death. I suspect, based on that it must have been a lot better in the past, because the current release is downright useless. Features that SolidWorks had in 1989 are still missing, and that obviously would still have been an issue in the past. But stability is also amazingly bad, and I have to assume that it was better in the past, because otherwise no one would be using it at all. Because the way it is right now, it's basically unusable. I had multiple errors just opening the default part template. I had errors saving a file, and then I'd try to save the file again to the same location, same name, no changes at all, and it worked fine. So I don't know what's going on. When it didn't crash, it hung so hard, I needed to terminate it from the Details tab of Task Manager. So, like, normally there's a few different ways that Windows allows you to close a hung program. This is the most extreme one, short of just turning the computer off. The student version is extremely limited to the point I wouldn't recommend it for any student. And, basically I can't recommend this software for any reason. Even if it was free, I couldn't recommend it for any reason. Onshape is a cloud-based CAD suite designed by a former SolidWorks engineer, which that makes a interesting contender just based on that. So I used Onshape several years ago, right after it came out, and I was impressed. It didn't have everything I needed, but it was a good start, and at the time it was receiving future updates constantly. I assumed that it would be one of the best suites I tested in my search after all this time, and I was wrong. So the pace of feature updates seems to have slowed and then essentially stopped. There is a student version available for free, although the limitations are significant. But that's kind of a diversion. But here's the thing: it's not evolving anymore. Apparently, sometime around the end of 2019, the company was purchased, and the company that purchased them is PTC, the people behind Creo. And it seems to have just ground to a halt, and if anything, it's actually been getting worse since then. Um, so I spoke earlier about concerns with cloud-based software, and one of the big concerns is with drop support. If a company just turns off the servers and you lose your files, you lose the time you learn, you lose the time that you spent learning the software. Um, I kind of expect that to happen with this software because PTC really isn't doing anything with it. They aren't pushing it the way they need to push it if they want to keep it alive. So I just don't see a future here. And I think eventually they're just going to shut down the servers, and this will be a footnote in history of CAD, and you won't even be able to get a copy because it was cloud-based the whole time that it existed. Solid Edge, also made by Siemens, the company behind NX. This is their low-cost entry-level stuff. Surprisingly, it's better than NX in spite of that. It's faster and it's more stable. It also has more of the basic features I expect to see. It's still slow compared to SolidWorks, both in terms of waiting for the software to process commands, but also in terms of features requiring more clicks and more user input to do the same things. So it has something called Synchronous Technology that they think is a big selling feature, or at least marketing seems to think so. They seem to think it's this great new thing that they invented, and maybe they got a patent, but you can get a patent on a rectangle. Actually, it's not something they invented. It's basically just instant 3D from SolidWorks, except that it doesn't really work. Not only is it downright useless, but they made compromises that were pretty significant just to get it to function at all. These compromises slow down the drawing and modeling by adding extra steps that would be automatic in pretty much any other CAD software. Siemens even recommends not fully defining sketches and features, because if you fully define them, then their fancy technology doesn't work anymore. Which is what adds all the extra clicks, is because things that should automatically be locked down because you entered a dimension or whatever, they're not, because if they were, then the big selling feature, or what they think is the big selling feature, wouldn't work anymore. If they were to remove this feature and revert all those changes they made to make it functional, I think the software still wouldn't be very good, but it would be a lot better than it is now. So hypothetically, if they made Solid Edge free, which I don't think is ever going to happen, but if they did, I think it could be competitive versus versus Onshape or FreeCAD, with a couple years of work under much better management. Currently, it's worse than the free options. SpaceClaim is a bit of a mystery. So I was able to get a student copy, and I was able to work with it. It's pretty limited, not just because it's a student edition, but it's not that the features were locked out. Features didn't exist, and it had a ton of issues. And like CATIA, it offers paid add-in modules, which can really make the price skyrocket. And some of those add-in modules are for very basic things that really should be included in the software to begin with. I mean, you shouldn't charge extra for things that are just basic features. Overall, I'd say FreeCAD is better in every way, and I couldn't find a trustworthy price. They don't sell it directly, and resellers range from sketchy to blatant scams. So I saw prices ranging anywhere from $250 to $10,000 for the same version of the same software. Again, I'm trying not to talk about prices, but this is just weird. I mean, you don't see this with other softwares. You might see a difference of 10% here and there, but you don't see $250 versus $10,000 for the same software. So none of the resellers I found actually appeared to be legitimate, and almost all of them seem to be in Malaysia, which I can't quite put my finger on why you'd want to do that. And I sort of don't believe that the software is actually meant to be used, because it's useless junk. But there's other useless junk on this list, but they don't seem to want to sell it either, except through these resellers, which are all really shady. And I don't know if this is the case, but I got this very strong impression that this is some kind of money laundering scheme. That's the only thing I can think of that they would they would have a reseller structure like this with radically different prices. Maybe it's some kind of tax thing. I'm not sure exactly what's going on, but I don't think they're trying to sell design software. I think they're trying to do something shady with money. So I'd avoid this one like the plague. So with all those, that list of 12 is narrowed down to one, SolidWorks. And that's not what I wanted to find out at all. I wouldn't have gone through all this if I just wanted to keep using SolidWorks. Ideally, I wanted something better. It doesn't exist as far as I can tell, and not unless you want to pay for CATIA. I'm actually a bit amazed because 94 programs on my initial list, 12 series contenders on my second list, and in the end, the two best options I found were both made by Dassault Systems. So Autodesk makes two different programs on this list. Siemens makes two different programs on this. PTC makes two different programs on this list. And none of them are as good as SolidWorks, which in turn isn't as good as CATIA. I'm not sure how that happened. I'm really not sure what can be done about this, about one company having a sort of monopoly on quality CAD software. And to be clear, I don't think Dassault is a great company. Well, or at least I don't like their practices, and I think their quality is going downhill, but somehow they're still the best, decidedly the best. Now, in the end, the recommendation I would have is, well, I kind of have three recommendations depending on your financial situation and your needs, of course. So if you're doing relatively simple things, you're working for a small company or doing stuff at home for yourself, probably your best option is Fusion. It'll probably remain around for a while. I don't know if it'll continue to be free forever, but for the time being it is. And I'm guessing, based on the fact that it's relatively cheap, even if you want to pay for it, it's probably not going to be insanely expensive, or at least not for a while. So Fusion's a pretty good option right now. If you want something completely free, and that's going to be free forever, even if they stop making it, you can keep using it for free. FreeCAD is the only option in the entire list that qualifies. It's got a lot of downsides, but it's the only one that meets those qualifications. If you're a typical designer doing a typical workload, SolidWorks all the way. It is more expensive than some of the other titles on this list. It's less expensive than some, but the ones the titles that are cheaper, in the end, after you factor in all the wasted time and wasted resources that you put into working with those other titles, SolidWorks ends up being the better value. And then on the high end, you got CATIA, which if you need CATIA, then obviously get CATIA. If you don't need CATIA, then you probably don't want to pay for it. So that I guess that I said three. There's actually four recommendations there for you. So what do you think? Did I miss something? Did I just trash one of the programs that you love? Leave a comment below. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. It really helps me grow the channel. Right now I'm trying to get to 1,000 subs so that I can tell YouTube to turn off the advertisements, because they won't let me turn them off until I get 1,000 subs. So please subscribe. Thank you very much, and see you next time.